May I? May I take your leftovers, sir? The whisper cut through the silence of the most exclusive restaurant in New York. My hand, wearing a watch worth more than a luxury home, froze in midair. I looked up and saw her, a 19-year-old girl in a worn-out jacket, her hair a mess, and her eyes filled with a heartbreaking kind of dignity. In her arms, she cradled an 8-month-old baby wrapped in a faded blanket. The child's eyes were locked onto my untouched plate with a hunger that shattered my soul. The entire restaurant went cold. The waiters began to move in to throw her out, but I raised my hand. For 10 years, I had lived in total emptiness after a crash took my wife and little son. I had billions of dollars, but I was dead inside. And here was a girl who wasn't asking for money. She was just asking for the scraps of my life to save her child's. Welcome to Scarred but Pure. Today, we witness a story of two broken souls meeting in a place of luxury, where a plate of leftovers becomes the start of an unimaginable miracle. If you believe that a single act of kindness can change a life forever, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Before we continue, I want to reach out to you. Which city and country are you watching from today? Write it in the comments below. I'll be hearting the most touching responses. The Sky Blue restaurant in the heart of Manhattan was a temple of cold, hard wealth. Under the dim glow of crystal chandeliers, every table was a kingdom of silence and prestige. Harrison Sterling, a 48-year-old tech billionaire, sat alone at his usual corner table. His suit was custom-made and his watch was encrusted with gold, but his chest felt like an empty tomb. He stared blankly at the untouched food in front of him. For 10 years, the smell of expensive meals had felt like dust in his mouth. Across from him, the empty chair felt louder than any music in the room. It was the chair where his wife, Sarah, and his 3-year-old son, Toby, used to sit before a tragic accident turned his world into a pile of twisted metal and broken glass. Harrison was about to leave when a voice shattered his thoughts. "May I take your leftovers, sir?" He turned and saw Maya. She was thin and her eyes were exhausted, but there was a fierce, silent determination in her gaze. She wasn't begging for herself. She was holding her son, Leo, with a devotion that made everything else in the room vanish. She didn't ask for a handout, she didn't steal, she was simply trying to survive. A lump formed in Harrison's throat. Something shifted inside him, a whisper of a spark he thought had died a decade ago. He pushed the plate toward her. "Take it," he said softly. He watched, mesmerized, as she didn't devour the food like a starving animal. Instead, with a respect that hit Harrison harder than any scream, she took a clean but tattered cloth from her bag. She carefully wrapped the warm food, folding the corners as if she were handling a treasure. Then, kneeling with one leg on the floor, she took out a small plastic spoon. She fed the warm food to little Leo, blowing on it gently. When the baby tasted the food, his tiny lips curled into a smile so pure that Harrison's fingers gripped the edge of the table. It was a smile he hadn't seen in 10 years. Not since his own son. Maya didn't look at the wealthy observers judging her. She was there for one reason, to feed her son. Harrison's heart felt a deep, slow squeeze. He was witnessing something sacred, a love that couldn't be bought or replaced. When she was finished, she nodded to him. Not a bow of gratitude, but a silent acknowledgement of a shared soul. She disappeared into the cold New York night. Harrison couldn't just sit there. Without thinking, he laid his napkin down, ignored the confused waiters, and followed her. He found himself walking through the damp alleys of the city, keeping his distance. He watched as she approached a dented old car parked in a quiet lot. It was their home. Inside the car, she bundled Leo into a thin blanket and began to sing a soft lullaby. Harrison stood in the shadows, paralyzed. He realized that while he had been living in a penthouse, he was the one who was truly homeless in spirit. He stepped forward and Maya turned in fear. "I followed you," he admitted. "I saw how you fed your son. I've never seen anything like it. I had to understand. She told him her story, how she had been a nursing student, abandoned by everyone and left to live in that car for 2 months. I can help you, Harrison offered. But she raised her hand. No, I don't want your money, she said softly. I just want 1 day. 1 day where he is warm, full, and safe. That's all. Harrison stood there as the streetlights flickered above them. He saw the same protective fire in Maya's gaze that his late wife once had. He realized that he wasn't saving her. She was the one pulling him out of his 10-year coma. He walked away that night, but for the first time in a decade, he looked forward to tomorrow. For the first time in 10 long years, the sun rising over the Manhattan skyline didn't look gray to Harrison Sterling. He stood on his balcony, overlooking Central Park, clutching a cup of black coffee. His mind wasn't on his billion-dollar deals. It was miles away, in a cold alleyway where a young mother was waking up in the back seat of a dented car. He had spent the night thinking about Leo's smile, the way a single spoonful of warm food had made the child glow with a joy that his billions could never buy. Harrison spent his day in boardrooms, but he was a ghost in his own company. Every time an executive talked about profit margins, Harrison saw Maya's worn-out shoes. He began to act in secret, sending his most trusted assistant to deliver packages. Premium formula, thick wool blankets, and containers of home-cooked soup that were still steaming when they reached the car door. He didn't leave a note. He didn't want a thank you. He just wanted to know they were breathing. But New York winters are heartless, and the cold eventually found a way in. On a Tuesday night, when the temperature dropped below freezing, the disaster Harrison feared finally struck. Leo had been fussy all day, his small face flushed with a heat that wasn't from a blanket. By midnight, his breath was coming in short, terrifying gasps, and his skin felt like a furnace. Panic, cold and sharp, seized Maya's heart as she realized her son's temperature had climbed to 104 degrees. She rushed to the nearest emergency room, her legs trembling as she ran through the slushy streets of Manhattan, clutching Leo to her chest. But inside the hospital, the air was as cold as the street. The woman at the admissions desk didn't even look up from her screen. "Insurance card?" the woman asked, her voice flat and robotic. I don't have insurance," Maya stammered, her voice breaking. "But my son, he's burning up. He's not responding. Please. He's only 8 months old." The woman's face turned into a mask of stone. "No insurance, no admission. We're at capacity. You'll have to try the public clinic across town." "He doesn't have time," Maya screamed, her tears blurring her vision as Leo let out a weak, high-pitched whimper. "Please, help him." "Security," the woman called out, dismissing Maya like she was nothing. Maya stumbled back out into the night, her soul shattering. She felt the world closing in. With trembling fingers, she pulled out her old, cracked phone and sent a 2-word message to the only man who had looked at her with kindness. "Help us." 6 minutes later, the roar of a high-powered engine shattered the quiet of the hospital driveway. Harrison's black SUV screeched to a halt, nearly jumping the curb. He leapt out before the car had even fully stopped, his expensive silk coat flying in the wind. He didn't say a word to Maya. He simply reached out and took the limp, feverish baby into his arms. Leo's tiny hand instinctively curled around Harrison's thumb, a weak grip, but enough to make Harrison's blood boil with a protective fire he hadn't felt since his own son was alive. Harrison marched into the ER, bypassing the security guards who tried to stop him. He slammed his hand onto the admissions desk, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the lobby. "I need a doctor, and I need one now." Harrison's voice was like vibrating steel. "Sir, you have to wait I am Harrison Sterling," he hissed, leaning over the desk until the woman backed away in fear. "This child is in critical condition. You will admit him the second, or I will buy this entire hospital by sunrise just to fire every single person in this room for negligence. Do you understand me?" The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The unimportant girl and her nameless baby were now the most important people in the building. Leo was whisked away into the trauma unit within seconds. Hours passed in a blur of white lights and the smell of antiseptic. Maya sat in the corner of the waiting room, her head in her hands, her body shaking from exhaustion. Harrison stood by the window, watching the doctors work through the glass. When the nurse finally came out to say that Leo's fever had broken and he was stable, Maya let out a sound, a mix of a sob and a laugh. She stood up, her legs giving way, and Harrison caught her before she hit the floor. For the first time since the accident 10 years ago, holding someone didn't feel like a memory of loss. It felt like protection. "You came," Maya whispered into his shoulder, her tears soaking his suit. "I will always come," Harrison replied, his voice thick with a promise that changed everything. But as the morning sun began to bleed through the hospital windows, Harrison saw something on the news flickering on the lobby TV. A grainy photo of him holding Leo in the ER was already going viral. The headline read, "Billionaire's Secret Family? The Mystery Woman in the ER." The world was about to break into their sanctuary, and Harrison knew that the fight to keep them safe was only just beginning. The news of Harrison Sterling's midnight hospital run didn't just spread, it exploded like a wildfire across New York. By noon, the Sterling Tower billionaire was the #1 trending topic in America. Photos of Harrison carrying a sick child in a crowded Manhattan ER were plastered across every gossip blog and news channel. The headlines were cruel, screaming about secret families and scandalous affairs. Inside the private hospital suite Harrison had secured, the air was heavy. Leo was sleeping peacefully, his fever finally gone, but Maya was trembling. She stared at her phone, her face pale as she read the thousands of hateful comments calling her a master manipulator who had trapped a billionaire. "I can't do this, Harrison," Maya whispered, her voice cracking as she looked at her sleeping son. "Leo, he doesn't deserve this poison. I wanted him to be safe, not a target for the world's judgment." Harrison stood by the window, his jaw tight as he watched the paparazzi swarming the hospital gates below. He had spent years hiding his pain behind a wall of stone, but seeing Maya crumble was a pain he couldn't ignore. "They don't know the truth, Maya," he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal tone. "And it's time I told them." That evening, Harrison didn't send a PR team or a cold legal statement. He walked into a national television studio for a live, unscripted interview. He sat under the harsh studio lights, looking not like a CEO, but like a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. "People are judging a young mother who did nothing but fight for her son's life," Harrison began, his voice echoing in living rooms across the country. He paused, his eyes glistening. "I stopped living 10 years ago. I was a man with billions and a heart of ice." The studio went silent. Across the country, millions of viewers held their breath. "But then," Harrison continued, his voice trembling with raw emotion, "I met Maya. She reminded me what it means to be human. She didn't take anything from me. She gave me back my soul." He looked at the camera as if he were talking to every person who had typed a hateful comment. Maya is not a headline. She is a hero. And Leo is not a secret. He is a miracle. If the world wants to attack someone, attack me. But leave them alone. The interview ended, but the silence in the studio lasted for minutes. When Harrison returned to the hospital, the atmosphere had shifted. The paparazzi were still there, but they were silent. The nurses looked at him with newfound respect. He opened the door to the suite and saw Maya standing by the bed. She didn't say anything, she just walked into his arms and wept, not from fear, but from the relief of finally being seen. "I'm here," Harrison whispered into her hair, holding her tight as the Manhattan lights sparkled outside. "And I'm never letting go." The viral interview had changed everything. Overnight, the blogger beggar became the mother of New York. But fame is a double-edged sword. and the light of the cameras had reached the one place Maya feared most, her past. 3 days after the interview, a loud, aggressive knocking echoed through the penthouse foyer. Harrison, who was busy teaching Leo how to hold a teething ring, felt a sudden chill in the air. Maya opened the door, and her face turned the color of ash. Standing there were 2 people she never thought she'd see again. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ratna. "Maya, my darling daughter," her mother cried out, reaching for a hug that Maya instinctively dodged. "We saw you on television. We've been searching for you for months." "Searching for me?" Maya's voice was a whisper of pure agony. "You kicked me out in the rain when I told you I was pregnant. You told me I was no longer your daughter. You let me live in a car for 2 months. We were just disappointed. We wanted you to learn a lesson," her father added, his eyes wandering around the gold-leafed ceiling and the expensive paintings on the walls. "But now we see you found a way to make us proud. This Mr. Sterling, he seems like a very generous man." Harrison stepped forward, his presence filling the room like a cold shadow. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a smile. "Who are any people?" he asked, his voice like cracking ice. "The people who left me to die," Maya replied, her eyes welling with tears as she clutched Leo to her chest. "We are her family." Mrs. Ratna snapped, her fake smile disappearing. "And we have rights. We want to be part of our grandson's life. And surely, a billionaire like you understands the importance of family compensation." The room went deathly silent. Harrison realized these weren't parents looking for forgiveness. They were wolves looking for a payout. He walked over to the door and opened it wide. "You have 10 seconds to leave this property," Harrison hissed, his eyes burning with a lethal fire. "If you ever come near Maya or Leo again, I will use every dollar I have to ensure you spend the rest of your lives in a courtroom. You didn't want her when she had nothing. You don't get her now that she has everything." As the security guards escorted the shouting parents out, Maya collapsed onto the sofa, sobbing. "They'll never stop, Harrison. They'll tell the media I'm a liar. They'll try to take Leo away from me." Harrison knelt in front of her, taking her shaking hands in his. "Let them try. They have blood, Maya, but you have me. And I promise you, no one is ever taking you back to that darkness again." The finale. A new beginning. The dust from the confrontation with Maya's parents finally settled, leaving a quiet peace over Harrison's penthouse that it hadn't known in a decade. The Manhattan skyline sparkled outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, but inside, the only light that mattered was the soft glow of the nursery lamp where Leo lay sleeping, healthy and safe. Harrison stood by the window, watching the city he once thought was a tomb, realizing it had become a home again. Maya walked up beside him, her face finally free of the exhaustion and fear that had haunted her since the night at the restaurant. She looked at Harrison, the man who had turned his billion-dollar empire into a fortress for her and her son. "I never asked for any of this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I only wanted 1 day of safety, and you gave me a lifetime." Harrison turned to her, taking her hands in his. "You didn't ask for it, Maya, but you earned it by being the bravest soul I've ever met. For 10 years, I lived in the dark, mourning what I lost. I thought my heart was a stone, but you and Leo, you taught me that love doesn't die, it just waits for the right people to bring it back to life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need a grand gesture for a love that had been forged in the fire of survival. He simply opened it to reveal a ring that sparkled like the hope they had found together. "I don't want to just be the man who saved you," Harrison said, his voice trembling with a raw honesty. "I want to be the man who walks beside you. I want to adopt Leo, to give him my name, and to give you the family you were always supposed to have. Maya, will you make me the luckiest man in this city? Will you stay with me forever?" Tears of joy finally broke from Maya's eyes, merging with the smile that lit up her entire face. She didn't hesitate. Yes, she breathed, throwing her arms around him. 1,000 times yes. In that moment, the billionaire and the girl who had once begged for leftovers were no longer strangers from different worlds. They were a family. The scars of their past were still there, but they were no longer wounds. They were proof that they had survived, and that even in the coldest corners of New York, a single act of kindness can lead to a miracle. As the sun began to rise over the city, Harrison looked at the empty chair in his heart and finally felt it fill with the warmth of a new morning. The hunger of their souls was finally over. They were home.